Hey all, I'm Adiraiju, the time-traveling giant monsterologist, and my time machine is ready to go. Today we'll go back to when drive-ins were a thing, fallout was as common as rain, and small Pacific islands were being bombed out of existence. Attack of the Crab Monsters was a Roger Corman film released in 1957. For those unfamiliar with his work, Roger Corman is one of the most prolific and successful independent filmmakers of all time, producing and directing hundreds of films, most of them noted for being low-budget and often critically panned, but more often financially successful than not. Attack of the Crab Monsters was among a handful of sci-fi monster flicks he created in the 50s, and arguably the most famous. The first thing we see are some opening credits that look like a shared project between Dr. Seuss and Tim Burton. We're then ushered off to hear an unnamed narrator try to scare the bejabbers out of us.
And the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast and the creeping thing and the fowls of the air, for it repenteth me that I have made them.
Hey, I know the creeping terror was pretty bad, but I don't think it quite warrants that kind of a response. So, we start off on a remote island, and the movie's sort of inconsistent with whether it's an island or an atoll, so I'll just call it whatever I please. If the script doesn't care, neither do I. The protagonists are introduced to us.
Dr. Vigon's group is here to study fallout effects at their worst. Dr. James Carson is a geologist. He'll try to learn what's happening to the soil. The botanist, Jules Devereaux, will examine all the plant life for radiation poisoning. Martha Hunter and Dale Brewer are biologists. He works on land animalism while she takes care of the seafood. Dr. Carl Vigon is a nuclear physicist. He'll collect their findings and relate them to the present theories on the effects of too much radiation.
Take notes, kids, there will be a quiz. And no, you're not imagining things, that really is Russell Johnson, the professor from Gilligan's Island, playing the part of Hank Chapman. Off the coast, one of the handymen who is ferrying these people to the island falls into the water and is attacked by something unseen. When they pull him back up, his head is gone. By the way, that unlucky sap was Charles Griffith himself, the movie's screenwriter. Having the screenwriter lose his head explains a great deal about the later parts of the movie. The next several minutes are basically expository dialogue consisting of lame quips and a bit of backstory. Apparently, this is the second expedition to arrive on the island. The first one consisted of two scientists who vanished without a trace in a massive typhoon. Both expeditions came to the island to study the effects of radioactive fallout on the area, since it got hosed by atomic ash and radioactive seawater by the usual atoll H-bomb test a few years ago. A number of people decide to go back to the mainland in order to bring back the body, but their plane abruptly explodes. At least I think it explodes. The movie didn't have the budget to film an explosion, we just see a bright light for an instant before it cuts away. Hey, maybe it didn't explode, it got sucked into the sky by the Rapture. That explains why it was so quiet. Loud booming sounds and earthquakes shake the island, as they will continue to do throughout the rest of the picture. They read the journals of the previous expedition, one of which mentions coming across a massive chunk of flesh from a worm-like creature. Knives failed to cut it, as they sank through it as though the stuff didn't exist. The last entry appears to have been cut off in mid-sentence. Martha and Dale go diving for some reason. It looks nice, though that's probably the most densely populated ocean I've ever seen. It's almost like they were diving in an aquarium. When they get back on land, Martha mentions she saw something big moving down there. The others have found a big pit in the middle of the island which apparently hadn't been there before. They hesitate to go down as another earthquake could bury them alive. That night as the storm hits, Martha and Carson hear the voice of somebody named McLean, who was apparently the leader of the previous expedition. McLean guides them to the pit, and Carson tries rappelling down inside, but he falls in when another earthquake hits. Everyone else tumbles outside when they hear the earthquake, and they bring Martha back in. The next morning they head out to try and retrieve the body. Carl mentions that he hates crabs, as they actually tended to swarm on wounded soldiers on the beach and tear them apart. It turns out there are some sea caves out on the beach that connect with the pit, and they enter from there. Meeting with the two demolition guys, they learn that big chunks of the island have been falling into the sea off the shore. They hear Carson's voice, but don't find anything but a smear of blood, and they exit the cave through Carson's rope. Something big smashes into one of the rooms in the scientist's shack and tears the place apart. Carl tries to confront it, heading into the room. Now where is the... Oh, there it is! The sneaky devil was hiding behind the camera! Well, most of the stuff inside was trashed, including the radio.
Whatever it was that did this deliberately destroyed the radio.
Wait, deliberate?
Every piece of wiring has been ripped out and chopped to bits. Look, every tube has been sliced neatly in half. And it had to reach way inside to do it without wrecking these cabinets.
Oh, actually, that's a good answer. They head back into the cave the next day. I guess to try and find Carson again. But another earthquake hits, the cave starts to collapse, and Devereaux loses his hand to a rock that falls from the ceiling. No, it doesn't crush his hand, it slices it clean off at the wrist. Must be one of them Ginsu rocks. This, by the way, is really gory for the standards of the 50s, certainly more so than other horror films of the time. This sort of violence wouldn't become commonplace for another couple of decades. They all get out and lie Devereaux down in the shack. That night, have you noticed that days and nights seem to last about a half hour each on this island? Something attacks the demolition guys on the beach and kills them. Well, the way they're fooling around with that dynamite, the killer probably saved everyone else on the island. Later, the voices of the demolition guys lure Devereaux out of bed.
We can take you to Dr. Carson, but you've got to be quiet. Very quiet. Will you come?
Oh, and bring some steak sauce while you're up, please, thanks. Something nabs Devereaux from out of the dark. Wow, it sliced the film strip, too. And his yell wakes everyone else up. A metal ashtray on his desk starts trying to talk them into thinking he's still in his room, but Carl grabs it and it goes silent. Devereaux's disembodied voice starts up again and claims it will explain everything tomorrow night. So, in like an hour? The next day, they find that the demolition guys have vanished too, and their dynamite is missing, but their grenades have been left behind. By the way, throughout the movie, they repeatedly mention that the island is rapidly collapsing for unknown reasons under repeated earthquakes, with the coastline falling into the sea and an entire mountain vanishing overnight. We never see any of this, but to be fair, most of the characters never see most of it either. That night, the voice tells them that Devereaux and everyone else who went missing is feeling fine, and are able to project their voices into the vibration of metal objects. They're in the sea caves, and everyone else needs to head into the caves to understand what happened. All of the men, but for some reason not the only woman, enter the cave the next morning, and... This is our first look at one of the crab monsters, and I'll say this much, it doesn't look half bad. It doesn't look that good either, but it's certainly passable for the 50s. Our heroes start shooting and throwing grenades, and while neither of them seems to have any effect, a grenade blasts a stalactite off the ceiling which stabs the crab monster in the brain and kills it. Sort of. They wonder why the stalactite stopped the crab when nothing else would, and decide to slice a claw off for study. They note that the crab is male just before a very angry female crab comes rumbling down the tunnel. They manage to bury the male with a cave-in as they run away, but the female just lives to taunt them as they flee.
And all of his party. You have destroyed them and tried to destroy me. This, mes amis, was one great mistake.
They run a few tests on the claw and discover that these crabs are weird on a molecular level. Their atomic structure is almost like a liquid held together by an electrical charge, meaning that projectiles like bullets and shrapnel go right through them without leaving any permanent damage. The rock killed the male crab because it landed right in the thing's central motor control center and stayed there. Oh, but it gets weirder. Apparently, they eat human brains to absorb their consciousness, assimilating the memories and knowledge of their victims Borg style.
Once they were men, now they are land crabs.
Next, they will be armadillos. They can only use the voices of people they've killed and project those voices into metal objects like a radio transmitter like we've seen before. They've been responsible for the earthquakes, too, as they can somehow project electrical arcs of heat, causing localized but severe earth tremors. They're noisy and not very fast, so they're tearing the island apart to get to the people more easily. As if this wasn't bad enough, they see from the photo that the female crab, the survivor, is pregnant. Fortunately, they also discover the crab's one weakness. A dose of electrical current can paralyze them, and a strong enough jolt can reduce them to ashes. They rig up an electrical trap for the next crab to come through the tunnels. Sneaking into the tunnels to plant the electric trap, they come across the huge crab. Is it snoring? They try to take a sample of it as it sleeps, but it wakes up and they have to flee before they can carry the sample away or fully set up the electrical trap.
So, you have wounded me, and I must grow a new claw. Well and good, for I can do it in a day. But will you grow new lives when I have taken yours from you?
Did the giant crab monster just tell them to go get a life? Things get even weirder when Weigand and Drewer discover that there's oil on the island.
I've never heard of oil being found on the Pacific Islands before.
The detonations must have opened a source deep in the island.
But look, it seems to be coming from two sources.
I suggest we trace them.
Do you want to follow this oil underground?
I feel we must.
Is now really a good time to go searching for oil? I guess it is, because the next thing we know, they all go hunting for oil in the monster-infested sea caves. The next several minutes are basically Weigand and Drewer sneaking around in the caves and trying not to get caught by the last crab. Professor Moron here rigs up the electrical trap when he hears the thing coming, and then he steps on it himself, paralyzing himself as the crab approaches him. I fully expected the crab to completely ignore his worthless brain for that screw-up, but I guess it ate him too. At any rate, our heroes have apparently been working to reconstruct a crude radio, and they try to send out an SOS over it, but they can't be sure it's been received. Then the crab calls up and tells them the climax is about to begin.
Gone dead.
I am afraid that won't help you, Hank. By the time ships and planes can arrive, this island will have vanished beneath the waves of the sea. But you will not drown. You will be a part of me. And as with McLean, there will be no evidence of how you vanished, or of my existence. We will rest in the caves and plan our assault upon the world of men.
At this point, pretty much the entire rest of the island collapses into the sea, and our three surviving heroes wind up stuck on the only ground left, a jagged pinnacle of rock. The last crab comes after them, as immune to bullets and hand grenades as ever. Yeah, try it a 50th time, maybe that'll work. Maybe the professor can make a giant crab cracker out of coconut shells. At any rate, Hank finally sacrifices himself to bring a radio tower down on the crab monster, electrocuting it and its unhatched eggs, ending their threat.
He gave his life.
I know.
Wait, what? That's the end? How is that the end? They're still stuck out there, and I will be here any minute. Get back here, movie! Hey! Attack of the Crab Monsters was one of Roger Corman's most financially successful movies of the 1950s. I fully expected it to be a complete disaster, but to my amazement, that wasn't the case. Sure, the crabs themselves are pretty silly, but they're certainly better than a number of Corman's other monsters of the time. The story runs along at a decent speed, and I was never bored at all. This is a quintessential horror B-movie. Overall ridiculous, but surprisingly well designed and entertaining, with a number of clever ideas. This is either a very good bad movie, or a very bad good movie.